All right, well, good morning, everybody. You made an excellent choice of where to be this morning, so congratulations. So on behalf of the OECD and the IDB, so the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and the Inter-American Development Bank, Dulce and I are very pleased to welcome you to this session with a focus on green jobs and skills. I just want to flag that this panel will have 3 languages: English, Portuguese, and Spanish. If you are already trilingual, congratulations. And if not, make sure you get your headsets because we will have those 3 languages during the panel. Of course, we're really grateful to be brought together here today, and a huge thanks to the State Department for thinking of having the Cities of the Americas Summit, and also to our hosts here in Denver. For how many people is this the first time in Denver, Colorado? All right, so they just got a lot more folks that know a lot more about Denver, so that's great news. So my name is Karen McGuire, and this is Dulce Batista, and I work in a center at the OECD that focuses on issues of cities and regions, and we're really pleased to start off this session. So just to give you an overview of how it's going to work, we're very pleased to welcome Ambassador Katherine Tai, United States Trade Representative, to give some opening remarks, particularly giving that the multilateral context that frames the conditions for workers and firms in our countries. Then Dulce and myself will be giving some information from some recent reports our organizations are doing on green jobs and skills, so you can get some facts and figures and some examples of what policy action is taking place. And then we have an esteemed panel with representatives from national government, local government, and from different entities that are active in this space and thinking about how to ensure that we're prepared for green jobs and skills. So without further ado, I would really like to welcome Ambassador Katherine Tai, who has an esteemed career in international economic diplomacy, monitoring, and enforcement, and currently serves as our United States Trade Representative. So please, Ambassador Tai, welcome to the stage.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you in this great venue and in this great city. It is also my first trip to Denver, Colorado. I extend my welcome and gratitude to our distinguished guests and panelists from near and far. I also want to thank our hosts, the OECD and the IDB, for organizing this particular event and for inviting me to speak. I want to congratulate them on all of their work to advance good governance and economic development in our region. This week's summit demonstrates the importance of local leadership to implementing the big ideas that have a real impact on people's lives throughout the Americas. Last June, President Biden hosted leaders from across the hemisphere for the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. And at that summit, our leaders adopted several important commitments on shared values, including democracy and sustainable growth, protection of the environment, and healthy cities for our people to live and work in. These themes are central to my work as the U.S. Trade Representative. 2 years ago, on April 15th, I delivered my first speech in my current role. It was on the topic of trade policy, the environment, and climate change. Of course, many things have changed since then. We have new geopolitical challenges, including Russia's brutal, unjustified attack on Ukraine. And we've seen how Russia's invasion has made global supply chains fragile and come under even more pressure for important products and inputs. But one thing that remains constant is the Biden administration's commitment to tackle the climate crisis and our resolve to do so together. In that 2021 speech, I underscored how this administration would take a whole-of-government approach to address this challenge, and that we would re-engage with our partners around the world from a position of strength. And that's exactly what we have been doing. Like other economies in the Americas, the United States is investing in our people and our environment to support the kind of future envisioned at last summer's summit in Los Angeles. Last year, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, the largest investment in American history to address the climate crisis. It will incentivize the manufacturing of clean energy technology. It will also create good-paying jobs in wind, solar, and electric vehicle manufacturing, and it will fortify and diversify the critical supply chains for clean energy products. We're already seeing the beginnings of historic investments all around the United States. Since President Biden took office, the private sector has committed more than $120 billion into the American-made EV and battery supply chain. The president is also taking significant steps to support developing countries in taking stronger climate action, including providing $1 billion to the Green Climate Fund to finance clean energy products. We are leading the clean transportation future and creating good-paying union jobs while we are at it. Trade is a part of our approach. President Biden has been clear that the United States is back on the world stage as a committed and genuine partner. And this is especially important to tackling the climate crisis because a collective challenge requires a collective solution. So from day one, my USTR team and I have been deepening our engagement with our partners and our allies. We are creating new tools and revamping old ones to deliver tangible results to safeguard our planet and create opportunities for our people. For example, in the Indo-Pacific, we are negotiating a groundbreaking trade initiative with 13 other countries in this region. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or the IPEF for short, is not just any traditional trade deal. It is our vision for how countries can collaborate on some of the most pressing issues, including on climate. The United States has put forward an ambitious set of environment provisions, and we are seeking commitments that meaningfully contribute to environmental protection and respond to current sustainability challenges, including climate change. Through the IPEF, we are also discussing more traditional environment commitments around issues like natural resource conservation and combating trade in illegally harvested wild fauna and flora. Our cooperation also extends to the European Union. Now, we've had our disagreements with the EU on several trade matters, but we got to work and resolved them to focus on our shared goals and priorities. And that includes negotiations for the world's first carbon-based sectoral arrangement for steel and aluminum trade, an arrangement that will incentivize decarbonization and defend key industries and jobs. We also launched a new trade initiative called the Trade and Technology Council with the EU to further our cooperation on trade and environmental sustainability. In my 2021 speech, I highlighted the importance of the negotiations at the World Trade Organization to address harmful fishery subsidies. We are dependent on fisheries for food, for livelihoods, for preserving the marine environment for future generations. Harmful subsidies in this sector have put all of that at risk and also create a competitive disadvantage for those who do follow the rules. And in 2023, I'm proud to say that not only did all 164 WTO members agree to an agreement on fishery subsidies last June, but the United States is now one of the first WTO members to formally accept that agreement. Now, there was a lot of skepticism that WTO members would be able to deliver any outcomes during MC12 in June of 2022. But through U.S. leadership, our partnership with other members, we finally achieved this groundbreaking agreement. This agreement is the first ever multilateral trade agreement with environmental sustainability at its core. It prohibits subsidies for those engaged in illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, for fishing of overfished stocks, and for fishing on the unregulated high seas. It also includes robust transparency provisions regarding the fishery subsidies and practices of WTO members. We know, of course, that there is more to be done. We need to bring the agreement into force quickly, and we want to build on it and add disciplines that will improve the lives of fishers and workers everywhere, including we want to build on this agreement to address the use of forced labor on fishing vessels. There are other ongoing discussions at the WTO focused on trade and environment issues, including the informal dialogue known as the Trade and Environmental Sustainability Structured Discussions. These have been extremely valuable to add energy and focus to the discussions, and the United States will continue to lead and contribute at all levels to ensure that the WTO is responsive and relevant to today's challenges. I also want to tell you about something that we've been focusing on with Vietnam, and that is forests and the timber trade. In October 2021, we concluded a bilateral agreement on illegal logging and timber trade with Vietnam. It includes commitments that will help keep illegally harvested or traded timber out of the supply chain and to protect the environment and forest ecosystems. We established a working group to better coordinate between our countries, and we've been meeting regularly. This agreement with Vietnam, we believe, can serve as a model for other timber-producing countries. And this work is critical because illegally harvested timber not only harms the environment, but also disadvantages those whose lawful and sustainable means of making their goods. This is at the heart of everything we're doing on trade, empowering workers, because workers and the communities they support are the engines of our nations. And for too long, workers were largely excluded from the benefits of increased trade. That's why we are writing a new story on trade, one that builds our economy, as President Biden says, from the bottom up and from the middle out. It puts workers at the center and drives a race to the top instead of the bottom. For our environment and for our people, this is critical to our future. We are aggressively enforcing labor provisions and trade agreements to help eliminate incentives to ship jobs overseas. We are collaborating with like-minded countries to create an ecosystem that rewards clean trade and clean jobs. That includes our new trade initiative in our own hemisphere, the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity. We launched this partnership with 11 other countries because all of us, especially mayors and community leaders at the local level, have seen firsthand the unequal effects of what we would consider our traditional trade deals. We already have strong economic relationships and free trade agreements with many of the partners in the American Partnership, but we are all seeking something more, something that will deliver real results for our communities, advance democratic values, and promote environmental sustainability. And this is so important because the green transition is having a real impact on people's lives. And that's why I've made it a priority to hear directly from our workers, small businesses, and our communities to incorporate their voices and priorities into our policies. We all should have a say in the future we will live in. This is truly a team effort. No one government or organization or company will get us to the other side. There is incredible potential in the green transition, but it will only be our strength if we empower and lift up the people who will light up that economy. No one should be invisible in our efforts. No one should be left behind because we are in this together. And I learned that there is a step on the Denver State Capitol building that is exactly 5,280 feet above sea level. That is to say that it is 1 mile high. So here in Denver, because the air is thinner, baseballs travel farther, about 10% farther in Coors Field, I'm told, than in other major league ballparks. And I don't know what that says about the Rockies, but I do know that tomorrow, the tomorrow that we want to create together, that tomorrow will travel farther and will be better because of events like this. The great Colorado poet David Mason wrote, "To know the fragile blooms with breathing color is to be reborn, happier than before." Sometimes individual blooms may seem fragile, unable to withstand the heat or the downpour, which we had a great downpour last night, but collectively, we are resilient. We can bloom together for the betterment of our planet, for our people, not just for today, but for generations to come. I look forward to working closely with many of you in the months ahead. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Tai, for joining us and for really highlighting the important role that the multilateral context plays to shape the lives of workers and firms, and especially the collective challenge. We need collective solutions, I think, a really important key message. So thanks again to Ambassador Tai. So now Dulce and I are going to give a couple of different presentations on some work that I think will help frame a bit the scene for our panel discussion. So as I mentioned, I'm coming from the OECD, which is located, the main office is outside of the Western Hemisphere, so I was glad to come over to this hemisphere to be with you today. And we also have, of course, the Inter-American Development Bank as a co-sponsor of this event. So I just wanted to flag a couple reports that the OECD is doing that might be of interest to you on this issue of green jobs and skills. I will be presenting most of the work on the Bridging the Great Green Divide. But I also flagged that another report was recently released on towards a green and just transition, specifically on Latin America. So I encourage you to look these up and check them out at your leisure. Why do we care about green jobs? And I put it in quotes right now because we'll talk about what we mean by that in a minute. But of course we hear about environmental imperatives, massive public investments currently in infrastructure where we need the right people. It's an area of quality job opportunities for the future. But we need to rethink some of our education and training systems, and we're very interested in understanding who might be winning and who might be losing in the way it's currently being set up and what we can better do to address that. So what do we mean by green jobs and how can we measure that? Just out of curiosity, does anybody here in their work use a definition of green jobs? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. Well, most of them are our panelists here, so I guess we got the right folks. So a couple of different ways to do this. One is to think about existing sectors, renewable energy or electric vehicles, and do it that way. Another way is to think, what are people doing in their jobs, regardless of what part of the economy they work, but on their day-to-day basis, they are doing tasks that contribute to environmental sustainability in different ways. And that kind of option, so option 2 is what we have chosen in our reports, but really because it helps cover the economy overall, and because it has a really strong link to what are the training and education needs in order to meet those skills. So there are many shades of green. I hesitate to say 50, but there are many, and some of the examples you see here on the slide are just to highlight that different jobs are going to have a different intensity of these green tasks. So if you're a solar energy systems engineer, you're probably spending a lot of your time doing that. But you could also be a plumber who's fixing a leaky pipe and you're contributing to environmental sustainability. And these jobs are at different parts of the education spectrum in terms of the backgrounds that are required. So when we did this analysis across the OECD countries, which are several are in the Western Hemisphere, but also a bit further into Europe and into East Asia and Australia, New Zealand, but when we take a look, actually, they are greening slowly. So overall, it's 18% of workers today, but 10 years ago, about 16% across the OECD, and this is the people that are in jobs where they're doing about 15% of their time in tasks that are contributing to environmental sustainability. So some concerns about it being slow, but we do see when we look at job vacancies that there is an increasing demand. So it is picking up, but we'll have to see how that pace goes because it will probably have to be accelerated. So taking a look at a number of the different divides. So one is the divide across geographic places. Across the OECD overall, you could have between 5% of the jobs in your economy in these green task jobs, up to 30%. So you're in very different positions in terms of where you are for the green transition. We also see that large metropolitan areas tend to have the highest shares and also have been the biggest winners over the last decade. So we need to be very mindful of that. Now, up here is a map for US and Canada, and you don't have to read the whole scale here, but I just want to flag that when you look at the OECD overall, that 18% of jobs that meet that threshold, In the US and Canada, it's only 13%. And in a minute, Dulcie will give a little bit more on some of the other countries. So just to say that as you're thinking globally, some of the other countries might be a bit more advanced in this area. Of course, we can't think about the green jobs without thinking about who might be losing their jobs in what might be called polluting sectors and jobs. And depending on who you are, that could be less than 5% to a quarter of the jobs in your region. So this has major impacts. So as we think about this big green transition, we can't forget these places and what we're going to be doing to help the people and the firms that are located there. Divides by gender, very strong. So only 28% of the population in those green task jobs were women. There's a lot of challenges associated with career choices, background in science and technology, and just different challenges in how people present themselves for different work opportunities, how they perceive them. But this means that we're going to need millions more women to be trained in some of these sectors and jobs of the future in this green transition. Divides across workers in terms of their skill levels or education levels and pay, because I want to make it clear that while sometimes we make a shortcut and say higher education means higher skilled, there are also a lot of people with very strong skills that don't have that label of credential. But just to say that over half of the jobs that were considered green task are held by people with tertiary education relative to only around a third in the non-green jobs. So we're also very concerned about training participation rates. Those in polluting jobs are actually the least likely to get retraining. So that's one of the other big challenges. And a final divide also on firm size. We see bigger firms are much more represented when we see where these green task jobs are held. So we have some lessons from prior transitions out of coal or from digitalization and globalization. And so while these sound rather obvious, they're very hard to do. So, you know, a coal community like the Ruhr Valley in Germany that was able to successfully transition their local economy, those lessons, for example, are having this long-term clear vision, anticipating the changes ahead. So, I mean, if there's one word of caution, it's not don't wait for this to hit, it's to anticipate. A lot of coalitions where there's a focus on who's winning and who's losing and how to fix that. Because if you don't do that up front, you'll not have acceptance of these new strategies. A lot of work on reskilling programs, but also making sure that those places who are losing jobs with this green transition, that they're attractive places for people to live and work. So a lot of investment, not just in the individuals and their skills, but the places that we're talking about. So one big difference, though, I do want to flag is that right now this is more policy-driven than market-driven, right? A lot of this is environmental regulations, but that means that the need for policy action to meet this gap with workers and skills is even higher than with some of the other areas where we've seen transitions. So I will start to close out here because the panel will go into a lot of the different policy actions to meet these green job challenges. But I do want to just highlight a couple things. One, that we really need to think about environmental and labor considerations together, because you can have all the great infrastructure packages, all the great ideas, but if the people aren't there to make it happen, it ain't gonna happen. So that's one of the big things that we wanna highlight. And I wanna give a shout out here to Denver because I had an opportunity to visit colleagues who are working in the Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resilience Agency, where they actually have people that are focusing on these green jobs here. And I should say, Denver scores very high on this green job assessment. So I see a couple of people from Denver are happy about that. Local adult systems, they need to be ramped up in general to keep pace with digitalization. Others, the green transition, another reason. It has to go hand in hand with local development efforts. If the firms locally and the workers locally, if that doesn't match up, it's not going to work either. A lot of interesting issues on labor market intelligence. What can we do in order to anticipate this? What kind of data and information? And finally, a lot of different actors that are helping to get people into these jobs. And whether it's, other examples from around the world where in Austria they actually have labor in-placement foundations where they get a bunch of firms together in order to work on how to train people up for a collective need. So lots of great examples around the world, and I think our panel is going to go into many of them in their countries and cities and regions. So I will stop here and pass the floor to Dulce, who's going to tell you a little bit about some of the findings they have for Latin America.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. We're very pleased to share with you the result from our recent study on green jobs and green skills in Latin American Caribbean countries. So as Latin American Caribbean countries go through transformations that as a consequence of the commitments they did in the framework of the Paris Agreement, we observe that a lot of important questions start to be asked. Will the green transition disrupt employment and livelihoods? Will workers be able to access green jobs? Are green jobs good jobs? And how the Inter-American Development Bank can support our region in this process. And to answer these questions, we analyze how the green transition could affect the composition of employment according to the types of tasks performed in occupations. And we distinguish between three groups of jobs. First, green increased demand jobs that are existing jobs that are expected to be in high demand due to the greening, but do not require significant changes in tasks. For example, a customer service representative are likely to be in high demand, but they can use their existing skills to support the green economy, and their current job doesn't entail any green task. The second group are the green enhanced skills that are existing jobs that are likely to require significant changes in tasks because of the greening, but an example would be a construction worker who would need to apply weather stripping to reduce energy loss. The third, green, new and emerging jobs are unique jobs that were created to meet the demands of the green economy, and one example are solar photovoltaic installers to whom all tasks are green. For the non-green jobs, we distinguish between two groups. First, the rival green jobs that are jobs that are likely to be affected by the greening due to their similarity to current green occupations. For example, a retail salesperson currently not supporting the green economy have already all the skills that they need to move into a green job. And the others that are jobs that are unlikely to be affected by the greening, at least in the short term, because their difference are very important from the green occupations. And the results I'm going to be sharing today, they are part of the upcoming edition of our series on the future of work in Latin America and the Caribbean that's going to be fully dedicated to green jobs and green skills. So the million-dollar question is here, that is, what is the share of green jobs in Latin America and the Caribbean? So there is great potential for greening in the region. About 13% of the jobs are currently green jobs. It varies from 19% in Colombia to 9% in Ecuador. And as in the OECD, we have observed that labor markets in Latin America and the Caribbean are greening slowly. And if you compare the share of green jobs pre-Paris Agreement and recently, you observe an increase of only 2.2 percentage points. And you see here, there is a great variability in terms of green jobs and non-green jobs. No, green jobs vary in greenness. The large proportion of green employment, 9 out of 10 workers, are in existing jobs that are expected to be in high demand, but due to the greening, we require significant changes in tasks. Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and Chile are the countries that are most likely to be affected by this. Very few jobs consist only of green tasks. Less than 1% of workers are employed in new and emerging green jobs, and this proportion is substantially lower than what we saw in the US and Europe about 10 years ago. In the US was about 8%, in European countries 17%. South-Con countries are leading the emerging and new green jobs, and Andean countries are lagging a little behind. What we see as well is that there is limited potential for further greening of the labor markets in the short term, and although over half of the workers employed in non-green jobs are in occupations high similar to current green jobs, the nature and the scope of the transitions caused by the green transition are very different from normal job transitions. And we'll see that it won't be so easy for workers in the region to transit from non-green job into a green job. Most workers in green rival jobs in Latin America and Caribbean will have to make 3 transitions to move into a green job. And that's a very different context than in the US, where most workers on non-green jobs could transition directly into a green job. Non-green jobs appear, at least in our region, to differ from green jobs in many specific skills aspects, so most of retraining will require middle and long-term interventions. We think that the green transition could exacerbate existing inequalities, and green employment is concentrated among men. In our region, green jobs are almost 3 times more likely to be done by a man. The gender gap is greater in Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Brazil, and Chile. Green employment is also concentrated among persons with 25 and 49 years old, so the green transition could bring additional challenges for young persons and older persons in the labor market. And this age gap is bigger in Chile, Costa Rica, and Uruguay. Persons living in urban areas have a greater opportunity to benefit from green employment opportunities. There are marked differences across the region. The only exception is Mexico, whereas the shares of green jobs and non-green jobs are very similar. We see that there is a great disparity within countries on green jobs, with most of the green jobs concentrated in capital areas such as Bogotá, Lima, Mexico, Montevideo, and Santiago. And we see as well, and the other side of the coin, is that certain regions are going to be more affected than others by the green transition as they concentrate a higher share of non-green jobs. So these jobs are at risk to disappear as countries adopt low carbon and sustainable processes. And in particular, Canelones region in Uruguay, La Paz and Santa Cruz in Bolivia, Santiago in Chile, St. Andrews, Jamaica, and Lima, Peru. So it's very important for us like the summer cities, because Latin American countries will have to work at the local level to promote a green transition. But at the IDB, we see the green transition as a great opportunity. Green jobs require more education. They involve more analytical tasks, non-routine tasks than non-green jobs. And this greater education and skills demand translates into a wage premium of 40% for green jobs compared with non-green jobs. So it's very important to support our region to maximize the opportunities brought by the green transition. And the IDB is supporting Latin American Caribbean countries to develop the right institutionality to promote a just transition through 5 lines of action. First, we need governance to coordinate environment, economic and employment growth, and ensure that this all translates in skills development and employment opportunities at the national, regional, and local level. We need also to generate green labor market intelligence based on economic and environmental policies of each country with granularity at the geographical level and also at the skills level of occupations. The green transition will require a lot of upskilling and reskilling for our region, so ensuring that there is close collaboration between the training sector and the private sector is key to guarantee that training programs will respond to the needs of the transition. Also, public employment services that could offer accurate and timely information on green jobs, that could act as brokers to identify short and effective reskilling modules, and most importantly, support vulnerable groups like women, WOLF, persons with disabilities, ethnic groups, to develop skills, because often they lack the right skills to access good quality jobs. And last but not the least, adapting social protection to ensure income support for workers who lose their jobs and livelihoods during the transition. And here are some examples of how the IDB have been supporting Latin American countries on the journey to green transition through base policy loans, investment loans, as well as technical operations. In Ecuador, we supported the development of a green jobs promotion strategy, the creation of a green jobs coordination committee, and design of specialized services for the green sector in public employment services. We have also been supporting talent pipelines for skills development in green sectors, such as energy and water in Haiti, agriculture and water in Ecuador. Our TVET fund have been supporting skills development for renewable energy in Belize, water sector in Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile, and electromobility in Uruguay. And over the next years, Barbados, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Paraguay, and Uruguay will make substantial investments in electromobility. And we are supporting the development of a regional sector skills council on electromobility to support the development of the skills needed for the workforce. So I'd like to close reflecting that the green transition is an ongoing process that will continue to create both challenges and opportunities for the communities in our region. And we believe that with the right strategies, the right policies, and the right institutionality, we can maximize the opportunities brought by the green transition. We can make this a just transition, and we can ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you very much. Well, and with the scene set, next I would like to invite our panelists to join me at stage. We will have an interesting conversation about the green transition. In particular, we'd like to think what can be done to make the green transition a just transition. And for this conversation, we're going to have different perspectives. We will have the national government, the local government, private sector, non-for-profits. So without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage Henry Valencia, the Vice Minister of Labor and Employment of Ecuador. Next, I would like to invite Axel Grael, the Mayor of Niterói, State of Rio, Brazil. Next, Terry Taylor, Strategy Director for Innovation and Discovery from the Lumina Foundation. And next, Jerry Young Johnson, Transformative Communities National Director from DREAM.org. And we will have also participating in the second half of the panel, Carolina Cossi, the Mayor of Montevideo, Uruguay, and an OECD champion for inclusive growth. So in the first round of questions, we wanted to explore and reflect with our panelists on the results of the studies presented by the OECD and the IDB, right? We're interested in understanding how that resonates with your local context and as well with the measures you've been implemented. Vou empezar com o vice-ministro Valencia. Vice-ministro, Ecuador tiene un contexto muy particular a nivel nacional y cómo la transición verde está refletiendo a nivel local y cuáles son las iniciativas que el gobierno viene implementando para apoyar la transición.
Hello. Hello. ¿Aló? Sí. Bueno, muy buenos días con todos. I'm sorry not to speak in English, but my English is not so well, así que voy a hablar en español, así que mil disculpas. Bueno, sí, primero agradecer la invitación y por permitirnos este espacio para poder nosotros expresar un poco de lo que nosotros estamos haciendo en un trabajo en conjunto con el BID y con el OCDE ahora. En ese sentido, nosotros estamos trabajando actualmente en una estrategia de empleos verdes. ¿Y qué es lo que busca esta estrategia de empleos verdes? Básicamente es recuperar y promover los empleos verdes en el Ecuador, pero con un especial enfoque de género. ¿Y cómo lo estamos haciendo esto? A través de la mejora de las capacidades dentro del Ministerio del Trabajo y sobre todo y fortaleciendo nuestro servicio público de empleo que se denomina Encuentro de Empleo, que es básicamente una bolsa de empleo. Karen había mencionado muchísimo de cómo se definen los empleos verdes, ¿cierto? Y se define como trabajos dignos también, adicional a eso, de calidad, con remuneraciones y retribuciones justas, que contribuyen esto a preservar y restaurar la conservación del medio ambiente, adicional a ese tema de acá. Y en ese sentido nosotros como Ministerio de Trabajo y como Gobierno Nacional hemos visto la necesidad de tener que implementar medidas como estas para poder apoyar más a la conservación del medio ambiente. Y nosotros nos vimos en la necesidad de crear estrategias que nos puedan conllevar a objetivos claros. Estas estrategias que nosotros hicimos fueron a través de normativas internas que nosotros empezamos a desarrollar, en el cual nos arrojaron dos lineamientos muy claros para nosotros. El primero, la incorporación de una oferta de capacitación híbrida en empleos verdes para el desarrollo de habilidades. En ese sentido nos encontramos generando nuevos perfiles de cualificaciones profesionales para capacitar a estas personas. ¿Qué es lo que nos permite esto aquí? Que las personas sean reconocidas en cómo se están preparando. Y lo otro es darle un enfoque de género a esta estrategia en la que estamos trabajando. ¿Cómo encajan estos objetivos claros en lo que todos queremos como OCDE BID? Es básicamente que salieron de las líneas estratégicas, de los lineamientos, perdón. Los objetivos, uno de ellos es, por ejemplo, asegurar la coordinación de las políticas para maximizar la extensión de los empleos verdes en sectores productivos cada vez más amplios de la economía del país, que de las dos exposiciones va de la mano, ¿cierto? ¿Y qué hemos nosotros hecho en colaboración con el BID? Nos remitió un estudio de efectos multiplicadores que nos ha servido muchísimo para poder identificar en qué áreas son las que nosotros podemos trabajar, como es el sector de la energía, transporte y el sector agropecuario, básicamente el más fuerte a que se dedica nuestro país. Apoyar la creación de empleos verdes mediante políticas activas de empleo basadas en incentivos orientados al sector empleador. Como les había mencionado, nosotros tenemos un servicio de bolsa, un servicio de empleo hacia la gente que se trabaja con la empresa privada. Es un servicio de empleo que se da para que la gente pueda acceder allá. Y lo que nosotros hemos hecho y estamos haciendo ahorita es a través de campañas de información, dar a conocer qué son los empleos verdes y poder capacitar a nuestra gente a la interna. Y nos encontramos actualmente analizando qué otros tipos de incentivos podríamos desarrollarlo como gobierno para poder incentivar más a esto del empleo verde. Otro de los objetivos claros que nosotros encontramos y que van de la mano es el desarrollar y promover habilidades y competencias innovadoras mediante el fortalecimiento de la formación técnico-profesional y capacitación en todos los niveles. Eso es muy importante y nosotros como Ministerio de Trabajo con apoyo del BID nos encontramos creando y actualizando perfiles de cualificaciones enfocados a sectores verdes, en los cuales actualmente podemos decir que destacan el cultivo de productos de ciclo perenne, actividades de albañilería, pero sobre todo enfocados al sector hídrico. Adicional a eso, comentarles que nos encontramos trabajando actualmente en la capacitación, en un plan piloto de capacitar a 50 personas dedicadas al banano, pequeños productores. Como ustedes saben, Ecuador es un país bananero, uno de los principales productores en el mundo, y adicional a esto también con 50 productores, perdón, con 100 personas del sector de la construcción. Y otro de los objetivos claros y que empatamos acá y que estamos desarrollando nosotros y que nos permite trabajar es priorizar los empleos verdes en los procesos de vinculación de oferta y demanda de empleo a través del servicio público de empleo. Lo que buscamos nosotros es, con esta plataforma que nosotros tenemos, en el cual las personas pueden buscar empleo, es que tengan que promover a la empresa privada que ponga más estas alternativas de empleo verde y que la gente pueda estar más capacitada y pueda tener mayor información. Eso es lo que creo que estaría respondiendo en cuanto a la pregunta de las acciones que nosotros hemos venido desarrollando, entre otras más.
See, in fact, Ecuador has been a pioneer country in the region. It's the first country to have a green jobs promotion strategy and create a governance mechanism that integrates, all the different ministries that should be involved in green job promotion strategy, like Minister of Environment, Minister of Finance, Minister of Labor, the sectoral ministers involved on this. And another very interesting thing that they have is that they're going to be the first country in the region with a web page in the public employment service fully dedicated to green jobs. You see this in services in France, in Germany, in Sweden, and they are about to launch theirs, and congratulations for the initiative. So next, mudo para Niterói, Brasil. Prefeito, fora de capitais como Buenos Aires e Montevidéu, os desafios são diferentes, né? Eu queria saber sobre os desafios que enfrenta Niterói e as soluções que a sua administração vem apresentando.
Bem, muito obrigado, Dulce. Queria saudar aqui a todos os painelistas e, primeiro, agradecer muito as informações que são disponibilizadas nesses estudos, que com certeza serão importantes também para o nosso planejamento. Eu acho que essa questão da transição, nós precisamos contextualizar também, quer dizer, no processo, né, que nós estamos vivendo, como o próprio título do nosso encontro aqui, é uma transição, quer dizer, para onde que nós estamos indo, quem que promove a transição, quem se beneficia e quem perde, né? No caso do Brasil, nós tivemos 4 anos de retrocessos, né, na política de sustentabilidade, e no mesmo período foram as instâncias locais, né, os governos locais, que promoveram os principais avanços, né, foram as principais forças de resistência ao retrocesso que nós vimos nas políticas ambientais. E muitos dos avanços aconteceram justamente na questão dos empregos verdes. Niterói, particularmente, tem umas características interessantes. Primeiro, nós temos sido reconhecidos e premiados, né, como uma das cidades, né, que mais tem buscado, né, essa transição verde. E quando a gente olha isso também, né, na escala nacional, hoje a transição está no discurso oficial brasileiro. O tema, né, da transição verde foi abraçado, né, pelo ministro da Economia, o que é um bom sinal, e isso percola, isso ajuda a fazer com que as demais instâncias se mobilizem também. Niterói é uma cidade que tem a sua economia muito beneficiada, né, pelo petróleo. Nós somos a segunda cidade do país em arrecadação de royalties do petróleo, graças à exploração que é feita em alto mar. E nós temos justamente aproveitado essa oportunidade, que não é uma oportunidade tão duradoura, né, para fazer essa transição para o sustentável e para uma economia verde. E temos buscado inovar bastante, né? Uma das medidas foi justamente a criação, né, da Secretaria do Clima, né? O secretário do Clima está aqui, o Luciano Paes, e que promove, né, uma série de ações, né, transversais dentro do governo e ações próprias, né, de mobilização. Uma das questões importantes é que a gente precisa fazer com que se compreenda que a questão da sustentabilidade, a resiliência, essa transição, ela não é um custo para a cidade, mas sim uma oportunidade para a cidade, né? E a questão dos empregos, né, verdes é fundamental, e como foi bem exposto aqui, né, se nós não fizermos da forma correta, nós faremos uma transição que não seja inclusiva, né? Nós vemos que as mulheres ainda estão, né, muito afastadas desse processo, né, de transição. Eu acho que essa é uma questão importante. Em Niterói, nós temos atuado muito em fazer com que a sustentabilidade seja uma oportunidade, inclusive, para resolver, né, os nossos problemas sociais. Nós temos um programa, por exemplo, chamado Niterói Jovem Ecossocial, em que nós selecionamos, né, no momento temos 500 jovens participando, né, de programas, né, que são programas remunerados, e eles são selecionados nas comunidades assim com maior problemas de criminalidade, e eles trabalham em programas de reflorestamento, recuperação de ecossistemas e capacitação, inclusive para essas oportunidades de emprego verde que chegam. Temos também buscado, né, atrair, né, a iniciativa privada para esse processo. Um dos programas da Secretaria do Clima é a certificação de empresas, né, que se comprometem com uma agenda de sustentabilidade climática. Isso nós acabamos de lançar esse edital e já tivemos como uma resposta, uma adesão que é mais do que o dobro do que a gente esperava, né, das empresas. E uma outra iniciativa é engajar também a academia nesse processo. Niterói tem a maior universidade, né, do Brasil em número de alunos, e a prefeitura, né, a cidade de Niterói, veio investindo, né, em pesquisas, né, e soluções tecnológicas ou mesmo metodológicas, né, que ajudem a transição de Niterói, né, para a sustentabilidade. E, então, nós fizemos um chamamento público, né, para essas pesquisas que são financiadas pela cidade, e mais de 70%, né, das respostas dos projetos que foram aprovados nos ajudam nessa transição, né? Então, acho que seriam essas aqui as contribuições que eu queria trazer nesse primeiro momento.
Muito obrigado, prefeito. Niterói is also a pioneer in local government in the region, but with the creation of this governance mechanism with, transversal interaction with different subsecretaries that are involved in climate change. So next, I would like to ask Terry more about your work. What have you seen as promising practices to close these skills bottlenecks that will come with the green transition?
Wonderful, thank you. So everything Lumina Foundation does is focused on the United States, but learning in our efforts about what is higher education and attainment for, we have challenges, including strengthening democracy and to climate change. And I think in the U.S., a bit behind this narrative. I hear we need a narrative for how we think about the green transition. We need data, which this is an essential report actually for us to understand not just jobs but skills. And so long-term vision and need to learn from past transitions. I think about our current state a little bit like 1999 was for the tech transition, where we had 3.5% of American workers were in tech jobs, and only about 25% or 30% of American workers needed tech skills to do their jobs. And then 20 years later, we went from 3.5 to 5% of American workers were tech workers, but we went from 30% to 80% of all workers needed some kind of tech skills. So there's all kinds of things we need to do to learn how to have a lower carbon environment. And so I think that there's just this broad need to knit together lots of sectors to do this. And local cities will be essential in doing this because so many of these challenges are extremely dependent on context. And I'll say in the United States, we need cities to step up because a lot of our national strategies are under-attentive to education and training at this moment. Only about 9% of all of the billions of dollars in new investment are eligible to go to education and training, and only about 0.05% are actually earmarked. And many partners need to be brought along together. And so there are, in the education sector in the United States, about 10 years ago, many community colleges, many universities started to do weatherization programs under the idea there'd be a lot of weatherization jobs. It'd be huge for the economy, and it didn't pay off. So there's a lot of folks in the education, workforce, and training systems who aren't sure that this is real, who aren't sure that it's going to be worth the time and effort in terms of local development. So I think there's a little bit of the time, it's different now, and there's a lot of investment. I think there's a little bit of bringing people along. I will say there's a few promising practices that we see across the country, and it's wonderful to have events like this to knit them together to sort of be this international message and strategy. So one, in New England, there's a campaign featuring little kids saying that when they want to grow up, they want to save the world by being an electrician. So I think there's a little bit of talking about some of these jobs as you care about climate. Being an electrician is one of the best things you can be. We're working with the All We Can Save project in the sort of climate wayfinding program. We're finding a lot of people deeply care about climate. A lot of young people deeply care about responding to it. But you need to go through a process of grief about the state of our world, of thinking about what do you already have to bring. You know, maybe you're not going to be an electrician, but you're going to go help your company account for, I don't know, your Scope 3 emissions differently as an accountant. And in Denver, they're investing both in the supply of green jobs, but also in the demand for those green jobs, which I think is just a fantastic strategy. And the last thing I'll say is Kern Community College District, which is in the sort of Central Valley of California. It's a very rural place. It's just south of Silicon Valley. And it's also been a huge oil and gas hub. For years, they have been developing an education ecosystem around clean energy that now you need to have those partnerships to make the most of these big new investments. And they don't see it as one apprenticeship program or one sector. It's the community college working with labor unions, working with community organizations that have trust in the communities we're most trying to reach. Because if we don't design these strategies around the communities that we want to serve, we're just going to exacerbate the gaps that we all know that exist. And so, again, I think there's a lot of good things happening, but we need it to add up to a larger strategy.
Okay, thank you. I would like to welcome Mayor Carolina Cossi, who have just joined us. Y aprovecho para hacerle una pregunta. Como alcaldesa campeona de la OCDE para el crecimiento inclusivo, sé que la inclusión está en el centro de sus prioridades, ¿no? ¿Y cómo se ve esto en el contexto de la transición verde?
Muchas gracias. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias por la invitación de participar en este importante y distinguido panel. Bueno, si les parece, les pondría un ejemplo concreto. Nosotros en Montevideo tenemos una intensa política de datos abiertos y de generación de información que la publicamos cruda y también la publicamos en algunos casos elaborada en determinadas plataformas. Entonces, con el centro en el ambiente desarrollamos nuestra estrategia principal que se llama Montevideo Más Verde. Es una estrategia abarcativa que incluye varias líneas de trabajo y una de las principales líneas de trabajo es gobernar en base a evidencia, lo cual se sustenta en una política muy fuerte de apertura de datos y también de interpretación de esos datos. Es así que publicamos todos los días los mapas de recolección de basura de la ciudad que quedan disponibles para la ciudadanía. Hemos hecho cambios de gestión y eso ha mejorado, pero muchísimo. Sin embargo, en los contenedores de basura que tenemos en todas las esquinas de Montevideo, suele aparecer basura alrededor. pero los contenedores no están desbordados. En algunos casos, la gran mayoría están semivacíos. Por lo tanto, decidimos implementar un servicio a través de WhatsApp en el cual cualquier ciudadano nos pase una foto de esa situación y la ubicación. Y va una persona en una pequeña mezcla de moto y camión, ¿verdad? Hace la limpieza, tenemos un centro de gestión y al ciudadano se le devuelve la foto del lugar limpio. Esto que parece fácil, lo hicimos con un pilar fundamental de nuestra estrategia Montevideo Más Verde, que es la inclusión. Entonces, ¿quién es la persona que va en esa, le llamamos motocarros, mezcla de moto y camión a hacer la limpieza? Es alguien que antes trabajaba, su medio de vida era la clasificación informal de basura. Entonces, empezamos con 15, y esto significó un aprendizaje mutuo para nosotros. Este servicio de WhatsApp no lo largamos para toda la ciudad al principio, lo lanzamos para un barrio, o sea, algo bien limitado para aprender. En este aprendizaje tuvimos que darle licencia de conducir, porque estas personas también usaban un caballo y un carro para recolectar basura en la ciudad. Tuvimos que encontrar quién adoptara el caballo. Entonces empezamos a cerrar el círculo y tuvimos, bueno, que darle la licencia de conducir a estas personas, darles capacitación en sus derechos laborales, porque nunca habían trabajado de manera formal, capacitarlos sobre temas de clasificación, hábitos de trabajo, en fin. Esto fue avanzando. Como le dábamos respuesta a la gente, porque estábamos limitados en una zona de la ciudad, nos empezó a ir muy bien, porque en menos de 2 horas le estábamos dando respuesta a los ciudadanos. Entonces lo fuimos extendiendo a toda la ciudad, ya son 100 personas, no 15, y estamos apostando a lo largo de este año en poner 100 más. Hemos recibido aproximadamente en un año más de 300.000 solicitudes vía este WhatsApp, lo cual nos hizo ver, bueno, estamos sumando todo, estamos sumando participación ciudadana, con los ciudadanos siendo parte de la solución, estamos agregando cuidado animal, porque un caballo que pasa a ser adoptado y se va al campo, y estamos incorporando gente a un trabajo como agente ambiental. Entonces dijimos, vamos a agregarle a esto más servicios. Nosotros estamos repartiendo bolsas grandes en edificios para clasificar, y también a través de este mismo WhatsApp, estos mismos motocarros van a retirar las bolsas cuando están completas. Le estamos proponiendo a la gente, a la ciudadanía, que le dé una segunda vida a los electrodomésticos cuando los va a tirar. Antes de tirarlos, que nos los dé, porque tenemos otra iniciativa también con gente que trabajaba clasificando basura informalmente, que repara estos electrodomésticos o repara los muebles y los vende por WhatsApp. Esa es otra iniciativa. Y también tenemos nuestras plantas de clasificación que siguen el mismo camino, con cooperativas de gente que antes trabajaba clasificando basura informalmente y ahora tiene un trabajo formal. Este WhatsApp sigue aumentando la cantidad de solicitudes, y como tenemos una política de datos abiertos, con esos ya son 400.000 solicitudes respondidas. Montevideo tiene 1,5 millones de habitantes, así que 400.000 es mucho. Con esa información construimos mapas de calor, que también publicamos, que también abrimos, y estos mapas de calor nos permiten, como tenemos tanta información sobre la limpieza urbana, no sobre nuestra frecuencia de contenedor, que eso es un tema, sino con lo que pasa alrededor del contenedor, estamos cambiando circuitos de la recolección, porque estamos viendo que igual, para achicar la ventana del hurgado, porque en varios contenedores vemos, lo sabemos, gobernamos en base a evidencia, que se produce un fenómeno de hurgado alrededor de esos contenedores. Entonces hemos logrado, con un trabajo interdisciplinario en toda la Intendencia, incorporar inclusión, trabajo por el ambiente, fiscalización, porque este WhatsApp también lo estamos empezando a usar para fiscalizar las irregularidades vinculadas con el ambiente. Es un proceso de aprendizaje que da una gran cantidad de satisfacciones y que nos impulsa a seguir pensando cada vez que vamos a un lugar y vemos un problema, decimos qué oportunidad de inclusión tenemos acá para generar trabajo genuino y trabajar por el ambiente. Podría seguir, nosotros generamos cada 6 meses 1000 puestos de trabajo transitorios para mitigar en algún sentido los problemas económicos que trajo la pandemia, ¿verdad? Y otros temas. Y dentro de esos 1000 trabajos transitorios decidimos, recién empezamos, hace unos meses, elegir 100 mujeres y armar 4 cuadrillas de 25 mujeres que todas tienen capacitación en distintos lugares de Montevideo destinados al aprendizaje de la siembra, del cultivo. Nosotros tenemos un jardín botánico, tenemos una gran extensión donde productores rurales hacen experiencias orgánicas, tenemos un parque que se dedica especialmente a eso, tenemos una planta de reciclaje. Todas las cuadrillas pasan 1 o 2 meses en cada uno de esos lugares recibiendo capacitación y aprendiendo. Y después, en terrenos baldíos que nosotros expropiamos, los vamos a ir convirtiendo en huertas y en jardines ciudadanos. Estas ya están trabajando en parques nuestros como si fuera su laboratorio. Queremos que la ciudad sea su laboratorio. Es un proceso de 10 meses porque la capacitación es muy intensa. Van a salir con capacidades, con certificados. Al mismo tiempo estamos hermoseando la ciudad y ellas saben que terminan 10 meses para que 100 nuevas arranquen de vuelta. Ese era otro ejemplo.
See, yeah, but I think it's very interesting how in Montevideo you're able to articulate, the technological transition, the green transition to multiply opportunities for inclusion, of your citizens. Congratulations. So now I will change to Gary. And I know that you work with a number of entrepreneurs. So is this situation creating bottlenecks? And if they are, what the bottlenecks are and how can we help to address them?
Well, thank you so much for allowing me the space to be part of this very distinguished panel and to be here at this summit to really talk about place-based work. I am the Transformative Communities National Director for DREAM.org, an organization that works at the intersection of climate justice, economic justice, and systems impacted communities. $369 billion. $369 billion. A very historic package to address climate change in America. It is the most historic investment that is coming to support this climate transition. And as Ambassador Tai had said, an additional $120 billion in private sector investment is coming. And so to me, working with entrepreneurs and working with especially entrepreneurs of color in this space, the bottlenecks is really about the fact that entrepreneurs of color have not been at the forefront of this work. They have been left out and historically left out. And then communities of color and communities who are most impacted have been left out. No one knows what a community needs better than the community itself, as you've heard from these mayors and mayors throughout this conference, this summit. Communities should be at the driver's seat of what the climate solutions look like, and that they are, and that's why we launched Transformative Communities Initiative. We're working in 25 communities across the country. These are communities we consider to be sacrifice zones, communities of high pollution, high poverty, and historically have been left out of the benefits that have been developed through the growth of our economy. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we don't exacerbate their conditions. We want to center communities that are most impacted in our climate action and decision making, and we want to do it in 3 key areas. where investments are made, who they benefit, and how solutions are deployed. And so where it's places that have historically carried the brunt of environmental impacts, so sacrifice zones, who, people of color and working families. And in that, I think as I can't remember who mentioned, but that nobody is invisible and nobody is left behind. And then how robust community engagement and holistic programs that support targeted local needs. There's going to be $60 billion invested in community scale infrastructure, and this is where entrepreneurs come into the work. I feel fortunate that I work at an organization where we've spent over the last 2 years really connecting with and building out a network of Black and Brown minority-owned businesses that are already doing work, already have technologies, and already have solutions to address the climate transition. And what we want to do is we want to multiply that. We want to scale that. And really we want to work with local communities, local governments, mayors who know what the solutions are, who know what the issues are in the communities. And we want to make sure that entrepreneurs become the prime of these climate infrastructures in those communities. No longer should they become subprimes. No longer should they become left out of the benefits. They really should be at the forefront of those benefits. And so when we talk about entrepreneurs, when we talk about local-based solutions to the urgency of this climate transition, we want to really say that it really has to be a regenerative impact at all levels, both socially, economically, and also with our environment. And then lastly, what I do want to say is that there's been conversations here about workforce and jobs. We've heard throughout this summit how workforce is going to be one of the biggest threat to the climate transition. I have the pleasure of working with Mayor Leon over here, the mayor of Huron in California, a rural community full of labor workers and agricultural-based. It's an agricultural-based economy, and he often says, and something that always stands out to me in doing this work is that as we look to green jobs, as we look to the green transition, how many of those ag-based jobs that people will be lost because of this, and how slowly it will be such a slow transition for those workers to actually acquire good paying green jobs. And we have to be real about that, and we have to be realistic about what those interventions are.
Thank you very much. And next, we're going to be talking about one of the key results of both studies, right? The importance of centering inclusion, both in terms of geography and people in our labor market policies. So in 1 minute, I wanted to hear, what have you been doing, or the good practices you have seen? So I will start again with the Vice Minister, Henry Valencia. So what the que el gobierno nacional puede hacer para acelerar y promover una transición justa?
Bueno, yo creo que primero tener la decisión política es bastante fundamental. Estos empleos verdes, como lo hemos venido trabajando en este tema, en esta estrategia que venimos desarrollando, es tomar mucho en cuenta a los grupos de atención prioritarios y a todos los grupos para que sean parte de esto de acá. Crear una cultura que lo podamos hacer. Creo que es indispensable hacer un levantamiento de información coherente y de acuerdo a las demandas que tenga cada uno de sus países. Adicional a eso, articular de manera interna con las distintas instituciones, que eso a muchos ratos es lo que falta. En ese sentido, nosotros destacar que hemos conformado el Comité de Coordinación de Empleos Verdes, en el cual están varios ministerios, entre esos destaco de trabajo a quien yo represento, ambiente, agua, agricultura, ganadería, producción, y otro que es muy fundamental para esto que yo conversaba hace un rato, que eran los perfiles, de cualificaciones era la Secretaría de Educación Superior, Ciencia y Tecnología, con quien hemos trabajado bastante en este proyecto. Creo que también desarrollar habilidades en los sectores verdes, demanda en los sectores productivos, hay que trabajarlo mucho con la empresa privada también y utilizar todas las herramientas que nosotros podamos tener dentro del público. Como lo había mencionado, nosotros tenemos este servicio de empleo en el cual lo que buscamos es dar mayor información a la gente, porque lo que creemos y lo que queremos es crear una cultura tanto en el público como privado, y que la gente tenga mayor conocimiento y capacitación en torno al tema de los empleos verdes.
Muito obrigada. Prefeito Grael, e os governos locais? O que eles podem fazer para acelerar uma transição e promover a transição justa?
Eu acredito que há muita coisa que os governos locais podem fazer, né? E nesse caso, eu sou vice-presidente de ODSs da Frente Nacional de Prefeitos, que tem procurado promover, né, e fazer com que haja um processo mais estruturado, né, dos governos locais para essa transição. Eu concordo, com o senhor Valência quando ele fala que é preciso criar uma cultura, é preciso criar um processo participativo em que o governo tenha um papel fundamental, que é criar as condições, né, para essa transformação, né, e a capacitação, ter políticas públicas, né, para preparar, né, a força de trabalho para esse novo cenário, mas é importante que isso seja um processo participativo da sociedade como um todo. Como eu disse antes, né, é muito importante trazer a iniciativa privada junto, é muito importante fazer com que, através, né, de programas como nós fazemos de educação climática nas escolas, que a gente busque, né, uma reflexão, né, para que a gente promova um novo consumidor, né, um consumidor que valorize, né, os produtos, né, que tenham sejam mais amigos, né, do meio ambiente, e com isso você vai influenciando a economia como um todo. Então, que a gente tenha processos de cima para baixo, de baixo para cima, né, e que a gente promova essa cultura, né, esse ambiente de transição, que eu acho que até a iniciativa desse encontro aqui nos ajuda muito, né, a levar boas ideias de volta para a nossa cidade e trabalhar cada vez mais nesse sentido.
Muito obrigada. Terry, what can the education and training sector do to develop a equity-centered strategy to close these skills gaps?
Well, I hope that education and training sectors who have been focused on equity for some years now, actually, have important knowledge about how to...
I think, Mike.
Oh, that's when I can hear myself in my own ear. Is this better? Yeah?
I think so.
Is this okay? Okay. I think education and training sectors actually have a lot of knowledge about how to reach communities, and a lot of, frankly, hard lessons learned. We've been working on adult learners at Lumina Foundation for years, and you can't just put a billboard up. You actually have to go into community, you have to find where trust is. And what we've also learned is that, so one, in America, not only are green jobs 80% male, they're about 75% white. And so if we're going to actually diversify that sector, we really have to think about how do we make this a welcoming place for folks. And there's also, in terms of locations, gaps in place. The places where we most want to uplift communities are not where the green learning opportunities are. They're usually across town. And so cities are essential in figuring out how do we help people be able to connect with some of these opportunities that may not be visible in communities themselves. I will say, though, I think there is a lot of potential in trying to reach adult learners of color. 40% of Latino American adults and 40% of Black American adults want to pursue some kind of higher education in the next 2 years. And we are not serving them. And so if we can find out how to help those folks, many of whom have been experiencing the effects of climate change, been maybe fighting for their kids to get services for asthma, seeing their own, maybe parent sectors changing. There are huge assets in that community, and so we have to go to where they are and find those partners that help explain what these opportunities are. And education and sort of community colleges, minority serving institutions can be huge partners in that, but they have to be recruited to the task.
Thank you very much. And Jerry, the question is at the core of your work, right? And what are the current opportunities and challenges you see?
Well, the current challenge has been that Black and brown communities, communities of color, communities who live in sacrifice zones have long been left out of the benefits of the green economy. And so it's not just, to me, I mean, it's my opinion, but I don't believe it's just about getting a job anymore. It's about actually building wealth and creating wealth in our communities. It's about making sure that as you are acquiring a good paying green job, that you are also gaining health benefits from it, that your kids are actually also gaining all the benefits on the ground of the green transition. I really believe that if we are going to do this work in the right way, we can't do it without centering communities that are most impacted anymore. I frankly say that I don't know if it's the space I should be in if it doesn't center people who have been most impacted. This is critically why I work at the intersection of climate justice and economic development. I also believe that if you are in those communities that are high pollution, high poverty, there is no way that you could do any work without doing climate justice work. You can't do human services without addressing climate impacts. You can't do jobs without addressing climate impact. You can't do healthcare without addressing the climate impacts. And I think that has to be something that we consider in everything that we do going forward.
Thank you very much. And Alcaldesa Carolina, ¿qué lecciones ha aprendido como ministra y como alcaldesa que podemos utilizar para trabajar en todos los niveles de gobierno para promover una transición verde, justa e inclusiva?
Gracias. Lo primero que quiero decir es que coincido completamente con distintas exposiciones que se han hecho con respecto a este tema. La transición hacia un mundo verde es una transición que es integral, que no significa solo un mundo más limpio, sino que significa un mundo más sano, menos violento, un mundo donde sea bueno nacer y vivir durante toda la vida. Eso como primer cosa. Con respecto a las lecciones aprendidas, diría que dos. La primera es que cada vez que abrimos una oportunidad para que algunos seres humanos progresen o salgan de una situación crítica, siempre lo que nos devuelve ese grupo excede por lejos lo que nos imaginábamos. Siempre. O sea que siempre hay que tener como una obsesión en cada una de las cosas que hacemos en cómo podemos incluir más gente, cómo podemos hacer que esto sea una oportunidad de trabajo genuino, porque el trabajo es estructurante de la dignidad humana, verdaderamente forma parte de la vida. Y la segunda lección tiene que ver también con lo que tú preguntabas hace un ratito, cuáles son los principales desafíos de las ciudades, cómo pueden hacer las ciudades para acelerar el cambio. La segunda lección es que tenemos que comunicar más y mejor. Porque yo verdaderamente con las responsabilidades que he tenido y con las que tengo ahora, tengo contacto con una gran cantidad de alcaldes de todo el mundo. De una forma o de otra, todos los alcaldes están comprometidos con una transición verde, con el ambiente, y sin embargo, por un motivo o por otro, no comunicamos lo que hacemos. A veces por falta de fondos, a veces por pudor, a veces por aquello de, mirá, está comunicando para promoverse a sí mismo. Bueno, lo voy a cambiar. No comuniquemos lo que nosotros hacemos, comuniquemos las experiencias. Porque las experiencias que tienen lugar en las ciudades cuando hay una política verde son excelentes. Y nosotros en los paneles especializados pensamos que todo el mundo está de acuerdo en esto. Y no todo el mundo está de acuerdo en ir hacia una transición verde. Hay negacionistas que militan, que actúan activamente. Y otra parte del mundo tiene tantos problemas que esto no está en su agenda. Una madre con hijos, pobre, que no tiene trabajo, no se plantea el mundo verde. Tiene que darle de comer a sus hijos al otro día. Entonces, tenemos que comunicar mejor las experiencias, comunicarlas mucho más, comunicarlas sistémicamente, porque así me parece que podremos ayudar a que distintos grupos de la humanidad se vayan acercando, y si tenemos cercanía podemos tener mejor participación, porque sin participación no podemos transformar la realidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all the panelists. It was a very inspiring session. I would like to invite my colleague Karen back to the stage for rapid fire questions and final remarks.
Great. Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed it. And again, the panel is just amazing. So we should all also give another round of applause to the panel. So before we let them go, we're going to ask a quick fire question. And I think it's to give 1 or 2 words on what we need to do for a sort of inclusive green transition. So real quick, each one give us your 1 or 2 words to help us close here today. We'll work our way down this way since you have to pass the mics, I guess. So.
I'll say prioritize equity.
Prioritize equity, all right.
Relationships and ambition.
Motivar e convencer.
Yo quisiera mencionar que es decisión política, coherencia y coordinación. 3, me pasó una, pero creo que son las 3.
Participación y esperanza.
Great. So you got it straight from those that are making it happen. So we were really proud to have this discussion today. So on behalf of both the Inter-American Development Bank, represented here by Dulce Batista, and myself, Karen McGuire, from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, we want to thank you for joining the discussion. We heard a really great sort of set of issues from the multilateral trade discussions that have an impact on the firms and workers in that space. And we heard about the need for collective solutions to collective problems and putting people at the heart of some of these trade discussions, down to what is the national level doing? What strategies, for example, like Ecuador, how can their public employment service, how can their green job strategy help us? Down to what our mayors are doing in their cities and those very specific actions they can take, often using new technologies, but also, as was also mentioned, communicating more, communicating better. And then what are the kinds of institutions that we all need to work with, from education and training to those supporting entrepreneurship, and those thinking about how to make sure that we hit those that might be on the losing end if we don't take policy action. And I think all of the presentations highlighted that this is coming, so we can't hide from it. Some other countries are actually outside of the Americas are already ahead of the curve relative to some of us here. So to keep that in mind as we think about our policies, but also that we need to ramp up all of our efforts. And so to learn from where things didn't work in the past, but also to think about what are these new opportunities that folks are talking about, because a lot of this is, as I think was really poignant to say, if people feel that they are contributing to this transition and that they're coming from this wide range of communities and they all feel part of something, that's what's going to help us make it happen. So again, check out the upcoming report from the Inter-American Development Bank. There were a couple from the OECD, one looking at these green task jobs at the subnational level, so you can see what different regions are doing. Another report on the just transition, the Latin American outlook of the OECD, focusing on that. And we really thank all of those who brought us here together again, the State Department and all of the partners here in Denver, and wish you a wonderful rest of the summit. So thanks again to everyone for joining.